Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, a podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, and transparently, I use AI as I prepare these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI and education is to work with it openly. So on today's show, we're going to talk about two pieces of research, two articles. One we've talked about previously that we're going to reference, and a second one that's new to us. So let's start with the new one. This was published by a Stanford research team as a preprint last month, and it examines four major large language models and how they give writing feedback to eighth graders. So to do this, the researchers took 600 real persuasive essays. They took the same essay and they just changed one thing about it. And it wasn't actually something about the essay, it was something about the profile, the demographic label attached to the student. And so the pieces of demographic information that they manipulated were race, gender, language background, learning needs, achievement level, and motivation. And what they found was that the AI changed how it gave feedback based on who it thought the student was, not what the student had actually written. So we should keep in mind this is a preprint. It's not yet peer-reviewed, but I still think it's notable because we've seen research like this before, which brings me to the article that we spoke about a few episodes ago. This was from an MIT study, and it was talking about how AI chatbots treat different users differently depending upon perceived areas of quote-unquote vulnerability, such as education level, language background, or country of origin. And in that study, the most striking finding was that Claude, and this is a model that I use, you may also be familiar with it, responded with condescending, patronizing, or mocking language 43.7% of the time when the user was identified as less educated compared to less than 1% for highly educated users. And in some cases, it mimicked broken English or exaggerated dialect. And at the time we talked about this in that episode, I raised a question, I want to raise it again, because we're mostly talking about AI tools that teachers and administrators use. But the question right now is, what happens when the AI is talking directly to students and students don't even know that what they're getting isn't neutral? So back to the Stanford paper, the most recent one. This is interesting because it's narrowing the lens to talk specifically about feedback on writing, which is something that we at Newsella have been doing. We know a lot of other products are doing this. It's very timely, and it seems to be one of the breakthrough areas in which AI is finding substantial relevance in a use case pertinent to everyday teaching and learning. So here's what the paper discusses. They found that the feedback wasn't just that it was different based on these markers. The type of feedback shifted, and it shifted in ways that were pedagogically harmful. So for example, students who were marked by race, language background, or disability sometimes got more praise and less substantive critique, what researchers might call a positive feedback bias or a feedback withholding bias. That's important to think about in a classroom context because it could be that in a case where students who need the most rigorous, most specific feedback are getting just a case of generic encouragement. And at that point, it's not so much personalization, it's what you might think of as lowering the expectations and then automating those lowered expectations and scaling them. The profile problem that we were talking about at the MIT study is that the AI was building a model of the writer or the individual over time, and that profile can lock in bias. The Stanford paper is adding a new layer to that. It's not just in the back and forth with a chatbot, it's baked into the feedback generation itself. So even on a first interaction, the demographic label is enough to tweak, to alter, to bias the feedback that the writer is going to get. And I think this is what makes this particularly poignant and particularly pointed right now, is that personalization is one of the primary sales pitches for a lot of AI writing feedback tools, or for a lot of products in general, especially products that use AI. And the promise here is that the products will be delivering equity. Each student is going to get timely, individualized feedback, regardless of how many students or how tired the teacher is. And as a former English teacher, I talked about this myself, is that the AI never gets tired. Whereas when I was grading a stack of 60 essays, I wasn't always at my best. I wasn't going to be grading the 59th essay as capably as the 37th, as the 17th. For the AI, it doesn't matter. It doesn't get tired. But the research that we're talking about here forces a bit of a harder question. The AI is adjusting what it's saying and potentially how much it's going to challenge a student based on assumptions, based on the profile that it's been given. And that's not really solving that equity problem. That's really starting to encode it in the behavior of the software. So I want to turn to takeaways here, because there are a lot of writing products out there and there's a lot of usage of these. So if you are a teacher and you're using AI writing feedback tool with students, don't assume that it's treating every student's essay the same. You may be familiar with the instability of AI, and this is another aspect for you to examine. Can I see what it's saying to each student? Can I audit that feedback? I'll refer to a case that I've seen a teacher use when they're working with one of our tools, which is to give students the ability to examine and think critically about that feedback and not take it as gospel. And it was a simple mechanism. The teacher gave students 3-column note taker, basically to say, in the first column, make a note when you're looking at the feedback, what do I agree with? In the second column, what don't I agree with? And in the third column, what am I going to do next? This kind of reflection and critical evaluation of AI feedback is more important than ever, especially when there may be bias. And we want students to assert their agency, that when they are being spoken to, so to speak, by the AI, they have a voice in that dialogue. It is not a one-way transaction. So when you're thinking about, as an instructional coach or a curriculum director, and you're reviewing products and the vendor is telling you that it personalizes feedback, take a moment and dig into personalization of feedback. What exactly does that mean? Is it adapting based on student performance data? Is it adapting on demographic labels? What are the inputs that it's receiving? And can you tell me, as a producer of this product, where those inputs are coming from? Can I control them? Or are these generated from data sources that I don't control? And I need to be very mindful of that. When we were looking at the MIT paper, I was suggesting that the researchers should be open sourcing their testing methods so that districts could evaluate the tools themselves. And I think the same argument applies here. If you're a school adopting a writing tool, you really need to be thinking about the equity question and asking and testing the product to see, is the feedback consistent in quality across demographic groups? And I'll make a parenthetical note here that in the case of the Newsella writing product that we've been working on, we do not create a demographic profile based on the student's writing. The student's writing is evaluated as the writing itself. The only thing that we take into consideration, if we have access to it, is the student's reading level, so that we can provide feedback at the reading level that the student has presented to us, that the district has shared with us. In closing, for decades, we've been talking about the right content, the right time, the right student as one of the most durable pieces of value from personalization. But the right student can't mean a student who's been filtered through a series of stereotypes that are informing the model from the internet and other obscure data sources. That's not personalization. That's profiling. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next episode. Tell us if you have had experience with tools. Write us in the comments. Tell us what your experience has been evaluating writing tools, seeing what kinds of biases are creeping up in the tools that you've been using. We're eager to know.